Well, hello. We are at the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, for today's presentation. We're going to talk about organizational change management and 5 things that you probably aren't doing right now, and maybe giving you 5 ideas of things that you could be doing in the future. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started. So there's this consultant, and he's giving a presentation on change, and he walks into a room and there's 200 conference attendees, and he says to them, your task is to rearrange yourselves so you are sitting in birth order. What do you think happens next? You're right, chaos ensues. It takes nearly 3 hours. There's this period of confusion, and then a few leaders emerge, and there's some brainstorming on the best way to do everything. And then there's some resistance from those who don't want to move because they want to sit next to the person they came with. And there's even a few that get frustrated and leave the session. But during the most frustrating part, you hear some grumbling. Why are we doing this anyway? This is so stupid. But after all, they all get arranged and settled, the consultant says, okay, so how are you feeling now? And some of the people say, I'm proud, and others admit that they're feeling uncomfortable, and others admit that they're angry, and some just say they're tired and overwhelmed from the whole process. I like this story because it's similar to a change at a small to medium-sized business. Now, if there'd only been 12 people in the room, the experience would have been similar, but it would have taken less time and perhaps been a little less overwhelming. And then if those 12 folks had already had an existing relationship, it would have been even easier, right? So these are all examples of change magnitude and change readiness, things that should be assessed before you start a change. But let's go back to the scenario with the 200 conference attendees. If the consultant had done some planning ahead of time, he could have created a very different experience for the attendees. They could have ended up with the same change, but it could have been the transition piece of it could have been managed much better. Maybe by doing something like putting big Post-it notes on the wall that had each birth year or even each birth month. That would have exponentially reduced the size of people that had to collaborate together. Now, the outcome is the same, right? We didn't change the task. We were still asking them to rearrange themselves. But because we did some forethought and some planning, we are setting them up to win. And we gave them just a few simple instructions, and that really helped them get through the transition a lot faster and a lot easier. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome, and we invite you to participate. Just to get started, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about us so you understand our background and why we do these sorts of presentations. I came from a technology firm that said they did change management and really felt that the technology was always what got focused on. And so started an organizational change management firm where we really actually specialize on the change management. And then we partner very closely with the technology companies if and when needed. So we are CCMP certified. We are Microsoft user adoption certified. We have project management certification, as well as a couple other technology certifications. So we've been doing this for quite a while and have a lot of certs under our belt. The thing that our team brings to the table is change management, project management, facilitation, process definition and creation, actually getting people to use and follow those processes, which involves a lot of communications creation, and just managing that whole process, as well as we do some training, development, and delivery, and we can help with some operations planning. And sometimes we provide resources if you just have a missing skill set or if you have a lack of time, because a lot of times when a change is going on, people have to manage their day-to-day workload and the change and the transition. So sometimes you just need a little bit of staffing to help there. And sometimes you just need coaching, right? And so we can work with you just to help on the planning and the coaching side and let them learn and let them lead the change, or we can come in and augment with some of those skill sets. But at the end of the day, we just want you to really feel empowered. We want you guys to get better results and to be able to do continuous improvement without overwhelming everybody and exhausting them in the whole change process. So You have decided to spend an hour with me, for which I am super grateful. And I have an ask of you, and that is just that you close your other tabs, you silence your phone. And if you do that and you don't feel like you got anything from today's webinar, then what I will do is I will give you 4 hours of free consulting. So 4-to-1 deal here. If you spend 1 hour focused and don't feel like you walk away with anything, you just let me know and you can email me and I will go ahead and I will give you 4 free hours of consulting. So thank you for spending your time. I want to make sure that this time is valuable for you. So next I want to cover what is going to be covered in this webinar, and we'll talk a little bit about ACMP, which is the Association for Change Management Professionals, and then like what a project plan for a change management initiative would look like, and then talk a little bit about the realities, and then those things that maybe a lot of organizations actually aren't doing. And some of the challenges that come because of that, and then some things that you can and should be doing. Now, I put on here 5, but I will tell you I'm a little bit of an overachiever, and there may be 6, so you may get a bonus one here. I really want you to walk away with at least one actionable thing. If you come up with 2, that's great. But at the end of this, just want to know what it is that you can do to actually improve your change management efforts and create a more positive experience for your customers or for your employees, because that's really what our mission here is. So to get started, if you know anything about change management, I hear people say, oh, I'm ProSci certified, or and people don't really understand the difference between what ACMP is and what ProSci is and all of those sorts of things. So just to kind of lay the land here, ACMP is Association of Change Management Professionals. They have developed a standard for managing change and all sorts of changes, HR changes, system changes, just post-acquisition integration. They really did a very broad and general, here are the buckets of things that you need to do to change. And so ACM standard is actually very method neutral, and it really just provides some tools and some frameworks, and 5 big steps essentially, from evaluating that organizational readiness and what the impact's going to be, to coming up with a plan, to developing those plans, executing those plans, and then closing out the initiative. And I took my certification training through a company called JTask, and they did a really nice job of basically outlining in sort of a project plan, here are all of the steps that you need to do in each of these phases. And so this can be really helpful when you start to think about, wow, change is a process and change has a methodology that you can follow. ProSci is a part of ACMP. ProSci is its own separate company. However, they're very involved and engaged with ACMP. And what I like to say is that ProSci seems to focus a little bit more on the people side of change. And so that's what I call individual change management. They follow the same standards, the same framework, the same steps, but they really talk about the individual. Like, is the individual aware? Do they have a desire? Do they have the knowledge that they need? Do they have those skills and those abilities? And then is the reinforcement there to make it all stick? And so that is the term ADKAR, which some people use to think through their change in order to make sure that their people are prepared. But the reality most of the time is that people don't even really know what OCM is. And OCM stands for Organizational Change Management. And so one of the questions that I tend to ask people when I do live presentations is, what is it that OCM means to you? Or what is it that individual change management means to you? Or even what is end user adoption if you're talking in terms of technology implementations? And so whenever we have this discussion, what we always come up with is it's all about communication, and then setting the right KPIs. Are we measuring those? Some people say it's marketing. It's making sure that things look pretty and making sure that we're giving the right messaging and enough, and that we're being persuasive and that we have clarity in our messaging. Some people say it's governance, which is, the whole approval processes, the policies, right? How are we holding people accountable? Some people say that it's all about just the end user adoption. It's about getting stakeholder buy-in, right? It's making sure that the people are on board. getting a clear definition of success. It's actually implementing the training. It's solving a business problem. So I would say that that all of these things are right to some degree. And so one of the first things is that when people start talking about organizational change management, it's a really important conversation to say, what does that mean to you? And, or what does end user adoption mean? What does success look like, right? And really, in the industry, for practitioners, the way we look at it is organizational change management is really a process, right? It's got those steps, it has those forms, it has those templates. We saw that ACMP has defined a process, ProSci has defined a process. They have project plans that you can follow. And so people tend to think, oh, change is something everybody can do. Everybody has to do it to survive and thrive. And so we just think it's not a big deal. We just do it. And but it can actually be really well planned. And so that example that I gave you at the beginning was, yeah, we could just ask everybody to change. And will it happen? Yes. But is there a better way to do it? And so that's what the ACMP standard and all of change management professionals are striving to accomplish. Really, first and foremost, we want to make sure that in this is actually a Kubler-Ross change curve. It happens with a grief cycle. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a little while. But anytime essentially that any sort of a change is requested, people go through this very similar stages. A change is a loss of something that they do currently that is comfortable to them, and then they're being asked to do something different and new. And so people tend to go through these different phases, and this is what we call the J curve. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're decreasing the depth of this J curve, right? And so again, in that example that we opened with, if you could just do a couple of things to reduce the uncertainty or to set people up for success, we can very quickly make that downward swing of frustration significantly less. We can also then work to shorten the duration. So instead of it taking 3 hours, perhaps now with a little bit of planning and effort, it can only take 45 minutes, let's say. And then afterwards, we want to make sure that we're sustaining the gains. So in business operations, what this is saying, change typically isn't just a one-time thing. You're going to want to operationalize it and put it into your systems and your policies and your procedures and your plans so that it's being managed to, and it's going to continue going the direction that you want and getting the goals and the desired benefits that you're looking for. So ADKAR, and we touched on this slightly, it asks different questions, right? It asks questions about the individual, and they say that organizations don't change, people change. And so I think it's really important not only to use these tasks and these checklists that come from the ACMP standard, but to also use ProSci's model where they're going in and they're saying on an individual level, why is this happening and what's going to motivate them, and really understanding the people that are impacted as human beings, and asking the right questions. So if we look at just sort of a comparison, the difference between individual change management versus organizational change management is individual change management is answering questions about the individual. Organizational change management is the framework and the methodology that we use to manage the change. And then we mentioned end user adoption because to me, this is always what it's about. It's not about an organization or an individual. Any system that you put in place, anything that you want done differently is because you want people to actually use it. You want them to consume it and for it to become their new way of life. And so I love this little comic strip here where it's a new CRM system that gets put in place and everybody's like, isn't this great? How do you like it? And he's like, yeah, it's great. I've now just had to basically take everything from my spreadsheet and now put it into this system so that they think that I'm using it, but the person's still using their spreadsheet, right? And so you may be getting those end results, but that wasn't really the intention, right? The intention is to make their life easier. And what you've done is you've made their life harder. And so we want to be thinking about consumption and really thinking about the end user and that they're going to adopt it and they're going to embrace it, that not that they're just going to do what you need to do do what they need to do because you told them so. when we get into that mentality of just do this because we said so, and it's kind of that, oh, well, we're the boss, you just won't get a paycheck, that kind of stick mentality, that may work really, really short term. But if somebody isn't adopting something or buying in or changing, it may be because they might not actually think it's possible, or it might be insufficient or not meaningful to them. And so my example here is that, a lion who's a diehard carnivore, for them to eat vegetables 5 times a day as momentous as climbing Mount Everest, right? So instead, let's ask for clients' feedback before deciding what advice to give. So think about asking them things like, what's truly important to you right now? In what ways do you feel ready to change? On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can do what I'm asking? In our practice, we ask these kinds of questions with each client. It not only helps us shape our advice, but it enlists the client in the change process. So, for example, if the answer is less than a 9 or 10 on a given task, we know that the client probably isn't going to do what's being asked of them. So we try to make the task easier. And then we try to keep simplifying it and clarifying it and reducing the difficult until we get that heartfelt, 8 or 9 on that confidence scale. And the reason we're doing that is because we need to help people change their mindsets, right? And to alter your mindset, you need to at least be willing enough to try, to give something a try, right? And so very early on, we see people that are in denial and maybe in shock and confusion, and then they sort of get angry. And then at some point they kind of give up and they say, all right, I'm not really sure and I'm really afraid, but I'm willing to at least give it a go, right? And so this is where, as you're thinking about the emotional journey that folks are on, you really want to help understand, are they in that ending phase, or are they in a transition phase, or are they at the point where they're starting to accept the new beginning? And there's some things you can do, like your surrounding structures. You can put some rewards and some recognitions in place that are in tune with the new behavior if they're in that new beginning stage, right? But if they're back in that anger and sort of just having some fear and anxiety, then you really need to make sure that they have the skills and that it's really clearly defined. And then if you want them to also be in that transition stage to feel better about it, if they see people that they respect, that are modeling it, it kind of gives them a little more sense of like, okay, I can do this, or I have a model now to follow. And so understanding this change curve and then understanding where folks are in this change curve is really, really important throughout the whole planning process. The other thing that I think is really important to note is there was a McKinsey study done that that a lot of organizations do project management, but they don't, and they do change management, but they sometimes see them as separate things, right? So they might go through an entire project and then say, okay, at the end, now we're going to manage the change. Or they may do a little piece and then say, okay, what are we going to do for change management? Okay, now we're going to design it. What are we going to do for change management, right? And so they do this. And then, or they run them back to back. Project is done. Now we're going to do change management. But really, what has shown to be most effective is that they're run sequentially and the activities address both the project and the people side of the organizational change. What I have found is that one person cannot be running both. Because almost inevitably, if you're running the project, you care about getting the project done. When you are dealing with people and change, you need to care about the people and how they're being impacted. And those two things very rarely just go smoothly hand in hand. And so to have somebody who's in charge of each of them is important, but those two people need to be working in tandem and together. And I think you saw before 35% ROI when you have some change management and some project management, but when you're working in tandem with each other, you jump up to 143% ROI when it's that really integrated approach. So here's the 5 things. Oh, nope, actually 6 things that you probably aren't doing. And we're just gonna kind of jam through these. And I wanted to come up with 5, but there was just too many and I couldn't narrow it down. So we're going to go with number 4 first. So thinking like a marketer. So what I mean about this is when we think internally, internal communications, quite frequently, we think like managers. We don't think that we're selling the idea, and we don't often communicate frequently enough. Marketers really learn about their target audience. They understand what their worries and their concerns are. And then when they do communications, they don't just communicate one time. They reach out in a variety of different channels. So maybe email, maybe an intranet site, maybe a written letter. And then they also repeat the message anywhere from 7 to 12 times before people really start to hear it and start to absorb it. And so very, very few organizations that I have met think like marketers when it comes to communicating change internally within their organization. Number 3 is they probably aren't segmenting roles in your change management effort. And what I mean by that is there's so many companies that say we have managers and they can manage the change. That is their job. But we'll talk about later the process. It actually takes a lot of different types of skill sets to lead change well. And so we'll talk about what those are here later in the presentation. The number one thing I see is that organizations that don't do change well is they're probably not following a process. And it's really important to understand that the process is not like you do stage 1 and it's done and then you do stage 2. The process actually happens in layers. And so there is an initial layer, and then you understand some more things, and then you'll move on to the next stage, right? But you can always come back and you can layer on that first stage. And I have a ebook that can tell you about the different layers, both of within the organization, the different hierarchies of where change comes from, as well as how you layer on throughout the process to make sure that you're getting more and more in depth as you go through and navigate the transition. And then a lot of companies don't segment or prioritize their change as well. They tend to lump a whole bunch of changes together, and then it becomes this huge, massive undertaking. Or they have tons and tons of little initiatives, but there's no clarity or alignment on what those initiatives are. And so this is where you start to see those silos and competing priorities between departments. And so most companies aren't spending the time to get the clarity and the alignment because there's just so much change happening so fast. And then the other thing is we often don't give enough details on how to do the new thing. And I think that that's because we don't know sometimes, right? It's the first time we're putting a new system or a new process into place. And so we're forecasting as best as we can and we're projecting, but we a lot of times don't get down to the details of, if this thing happens, then go do this. We may do the first level, right, of the process, but then we don't think about what those exceptions are. So to really spend some time to define processes, to really look at those what if scenarios, it can be incredibly valuable in the long run. And then the other thing is, a lot of times, and this is the bonus one, is that we don't usually get consistent regular inputs. What I see happens is somebody says, we need to make a change. We get all excited. Everybody gets involved and engaged. We put together a plan. We start implementing the change. And then poof, we're done. But we need to keep checking in, and because we're going to keep learning, right? And so if we can set up cadences of feedback loops and making sure that we're constantly getting those regular inputs, we can get that continuous improvement that our company needs in order to continue to innovate. So you probably are doing a good job of the planning piece. You probably are doing a good job, maybe even of the communication piece, although a lot of companies tell me that they aren't doing a good job there. But in terms of challenges, things that I see happen frequently is that there are competing priorities, there's silos within that organization, there's that lack of clarity. People are trying to do too many things and they're not given the appropriate amount of space and time. What I mean by this one is resource allocation. What tends to happen is your best players are the ones who kind of know everything. They have the good rapport within others in the organization. And so they get handed the task of leading the change, but they're doing their regular day-to-day job and trying to implement this new change. And so they're having to learn new things, they're having to assist other people and to do their regular job. And so a lot of times we just don't give people enough space and enough time in order to do all of that. And then the other thing I see is sometimes that lack of user awareness. People just don't really understand the why. And so again, in our initial opening scenario, the people grumbling about like, why are we even doing this? This is stupid. It really makes them disengage. And so you hear all the time, define what's in it for me. And that will help people. I don't think it helps people change. I think it helps people stick through the toughness of the transition phase. And they need to understand what their role in that change is and how what they do ultimately has an impact on your mission or your values or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so when people don't understand, they give up. So what can you do about all of this? And I'm going to, again, give you just a quick overview of the process that we follow and how I think about it in terms of how I've organized the team and in how we lead change management efforts. And you can pick one or two of these and try them out within your organization. But here's how I like to think about the ACMP standard. And you have to realize and educate leadership that each of these areas requires a different skill set. And so start with the ones that are in your wheelhouse, right? And then find people to help in the areas that aren't your area of expertise. So as a manager or a leader, you may get to speak to the makeup of a project team. And so if you can start by just educating everyone in your organization that it takes different skill sets to garner good buy-in during times of change. And this is sort of the way we think about it is there's a benefits realization phase where you're getting the definition of the change, you're trying to define the KPIs. At this stage, you need somebody who's kind of at that executive level that has facilitation skills, who really understands how to get alignment. Sometimes at this stage, we even need mediation, right? Because this is where we've got all those different groups and we're trying to come together and get clear on what is it that we need to do and why. And so that takes that executive functioning mindset and somebody who can lead and who can facilitate. And so that's really important in that phase to sort of set you off on the right foot. In the next stage, I call stakeholder engagement. And in this role, in this stage, really what you're doing is one, you're identifying who the users are, and then you need to really understand them. So what motivates them? What is it that they're afraid of? Because again, the more you understand about where they are on that emotional curve, the better you'll be able to support them. And then also in the stakeholder engagement, I see so often that people don't define who is in each group, right? And so they'll say, we're going to put this change in and it's going to impact all the salespeople. And then you get ready to send the communication and it's like, we also need to send it to the admins and you also need to send it to the head of HR. And it's like, well, why? I thought this was just impacting sales. Well, it is impacting sales, but it has these tangential impacts and effects. And so this is where you get into really understanding the processes and who's going to be impacted. And so there's two different kind of mindsets that you need in this stakeholder engagement phase. First of all, to have somebody with a little bit of a psychology understanding background that really has a lot of empathy is incredibly helpful. And then the other thing is you need that really detail-oriented person who is thinking through all the possible scenarios, the what ifs, here is the process, here's what's expected, here's how you do it. So this stakeholder engagement, you actually need two different skill sets. And those skill sets are very different than that executive functioning mindset. So the third one is communications, and that one you typically need somebody who's a graphics person and or a writer. And then in training, you need somebody who's more of a teacher mentality or teacher persona. They're very supportive and they probably have a lot of patience. And then when you get into the last phase, which is the operationalization, this is where you need the manager mindset. This is the operations, the organizational development folks, the people that can think about what are those incentives that we need to put in place? How do we integrate this into our HR system? How do we integrate this into our review processes or our compensation structure, the support staff, what's needed to make it go live. And so these are people who are managers and they're thinking about ongoing organizational policies in order to keep the change going and to make it the new normal. So when you start thinking about and educating folks that there's these different phases and stages, you definitely want to think about that process and then define each of those different people to go into each of those different roles. And you need to make sure you have the right people in each area, and you know your organization, you know yourself, you know of all of those which ones are easiest for you, and you know where there's areas that you need to get that shored up. And so put together that team and make sure that you have the right people in the right seats to lead the change at the right time in the project. That's idea one. Idea two is to really start out with getting a charter. And this is getting that documentation and that alignment and that agreement. And if you can't do this as a company, without it just being the leader dictating it, it might make sense to get a facilitator to come in. But if you can put down on one sheet of paper, this is the change, this is why we're doing it, these are the desired outcomes, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else. When you're doing this, you will find that you will want to bucket it in really big, large buckets, and that's okay. But you're going to want to start to segment it down, because that's those layers that I was talking about that you're going to have to come back and you're going to have to keep adding to that level of clarity. And when it's just a large change, like we're going to purchase a company, the change is that we want to integrate those two companies. Well, that is much harder to attain than to say, okay, we need to integrate the technology systems, we need to integrate the business processes, we need to integrate the customer experience, we need to, right? Those are all separate little individual changes. And so understanding that and not trying to smash too much into one charter is a pretty important thing. But more important than that is that you're getting the alignment. So the different leaders in the organization all have to be on the same page and really understand the why. And I think it's important to note that the why is different for you as an individual than the why for the organization, which is even different than the why from the end users. And so think about the why statement from all of those aspects, not just from the company's aspect. And the reason I say that is you will get to a point where you will be tired of leading the change. Things will seem hard. And if you know your why, it'll help you sustain, it'll help you get through it and persevere in order to make sure that the change gets all the way, you get all the way through it. Idea number 3 is think like a marketer and have empathy for your stakeholders. And so I talked a little bit earlier about things that people don't do with thinking like a marketer. But if you're going to think like a marketer, marketers create personas and they think about what people care about. They think about where they're hanging out. They think about what language they're using. And if users don't feel like they're understood by you, then you can at least start forming some empathy by thinking about what motivates them and consider communicating using words that resonate with them. And so the way I like to think about this is with this 5 fingers example. People don't do things because you want them to. They do things because it's fulfilling a basic need. And so almost every person you meet will tell you within the first 5 to 7 minutes what it is that motivates them. And now everybody has a little bit of all of these, but people tend to fall into one category or another more often than not. And so we start by thinking about the security people. These are the people that are asking things like, did I do it right? Did I do good or did I do bad, right? And so security people are looking to get the thumbs up. Status people want to be known as number one. They want to be the ones who are winning. And if they are not, they will point the finger and they will place blame. The people that are middle finger people are autonomy. You probably have seen this in traffic before. That is actually a physical representation of trying to grab for power and control. And so people that are motivated by autonomy are represented by the middle finger for just the reason you would suspect. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people. I know lots of people that are power and autonomy people. It's okay. You can be a lovely person and still just control and is really important to you. The next one is relationships. And so this is your ring finger. These people care more about how is this going to impact my relationship with another person than, whether they're getting it right or not. And then last is justice. So if you think of pinky promise, I swear I pinky promise, those would be justice and fairness people. So the words that you use when you communicate with folks, think about these 5 different motivators and see if there are some general buckets that you can put folks into. Like I would make the general statement that quite frequently salespeople are about either status or relationship. The salespeople love to win, and salespeople build relationships, right? And so I would, in a communication, use things like taking care of people, right? I would talk about the why, about winning. I would use those sorts of words. Whereas if I was talking to somebody who was more concerned with power and autonomy, I would help them to see how they're going to get to continue to have control. Like we're putting these processes in place so you know exactly what is expected of you, and you can control your destiny. You can control the outcomes of your day. If you're talking to people that are about fairness and justice, you need to talk about equality. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to make it fair and equal for everyone. I believe that you can actually put all 5 of these into one message, into one communication. But if you are segmenting out your stakeholder groups, you can actually narrow this down and make it feel like it's really targeted to them just by watching the words that you're choosing. And then idea 4 is spend way more time than you think you need to doing process details. And I know that some organizations find documentation to be incredibly wasteful. I agree. If you do a bunch of process documentation and you don't use it, then it's wasteful. But if you do process documentation and it's at too high of a level, it just leaves things ambiguous, and that just creates more uncertainty and less clarity, and then that gap just continues to be wider and longer. And so you might consider getting a business analyst or somebody who really understands details and can document the process and what's expected of people. And then you actually have to use that though to do training. And it's not just a one-time training. Training should be ongoing and it should be iterative. Not only do you have people that are new to the organization, but even if you have the same folks, people forget over time, right? And you continue to improve processes. And so getting into a very consistent review of how things are done, making sure things that are very detailed and process oriented are documented. That's why you look at organizations that are world class, that are ISO certified. That is what they've done. They've gone down to the very role, every step that the person needs to take. Now, depending on your organization, your culture, depending on the size of the change that's being implemented, how deep you go on documentation can vary. If it's a very simple change and it's very intuitive, then you probably don't need to do a whole lot of documentation. However, people choose to skimp, I think, on budgets a lot of times in this area, thinking, oh, we don't really need to go that deep. People will figure it out. Or so Joe next to me will train me. We're going to train the trainer. All of those things are great and nice. And yes, it works. But the more clarity that you can provide, the more you're giving people the skills and the knowledge that they need in order to be successful. And so that's where we're setting people up for success. So this is very much an example at the very beginning of the presentation where if somebody had just said, here's the process for how we're going to do it. So you guys are going to line up. The way we're going to do that is we're going to have each of you go to the month that's on the wall. You are going to put yourself in order of year. And then we're going to have a 20-minute segment where we're going to just call out the years. And then month by month, you're going to come up and you're going to set yourself in order. That's an example of the difference between giving detailed process and not, right? We didn't have to say, first, you're going to pick up your bag and then you're going to walk to this and then you're going to set down your bag and then you're right. So that's what I mean by the level. Detail is good. We're not asking you to spend a fortune on doing process documentation, but we are asking you to spend enough time thinking through the details in order to give clarity to folks so that they know what to do. All right, I beat that one with it like a dead horse. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this one. All right, and then the fifth idea here for you is work with a project manager to make sure that it's an integrated part of the project. So there's a few big gotchas. The first thing is that if you have an organizational change management lead, make sure that they are working in collaboration with the project manager, and it's very clear which pieces of the project manager will manage and which pieces of the project the organizational change management lead will manage. Couple things that I see that always get forgotten when it comes to communications. A lot of times communications get put into a project plan. However, we don't actually define what the approval process is for those communications. So we don't tend to put things in like who's going to write it, who's going to review it, how long do they have to review it, if it needs edits, how many days do you get to make the edits, where is it going to actually be sent from? Who's going to be the person who actually sends it? Where do we go about making sure that we know who the stakeholders are that should get said communication? All of those things get figured out, but they tend to get figured out at the last minute, right when you're trying to get the communication out. So please, please, please plan for that. And then we don't often think about which the individuals are in the stakeholder group. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, where you'll just say, this is going to impact everyone in our St. Louis office, let's say. And then you go to pull a distribution list or something and you find out that somebody's not on that list, right? So really thinking about who are the folks and how are we even going to determine who the folks are that are in each of those stakeholder groups. It's a really good exercise very early on in the project to think about, and then to talk about what is the process going to be for updating that. Because if you're running a big ERP project that's going to take 3 years, let's say, maybe the people that are in the finance department change over that 3 years. And so there needs to be a place where we're adding those stakeholder names and email addresses, and then we're removing stakeholder names and email addresses as roles change and as people come and go from the organization. And then the other, just kind of a tip, it's not really a gotcha, but it has been proven that the more frequently you meet, the more successful a change any project management or change management initiative is. So it's not about the duration of the change. It's not about the size of the change. It's about the frequency with which you meet. And I think that that's just because you get those improved lines of communication. And then again, since I came up with 6 things you aren't doing, I thought I should give you 6 ideas of things you could do. And so the last idea here is set up what's called a transition management team. And this would be the group that is going to continue to facilitate and help with issues after the change is in effect. So we talked again earlier at the beginning, the change was where you're sitting currently to your new seat. That was the change. The transition was all of that chaos that happened in between until the change became done. So what happens is we put a system in place, or we say, this is the new way of doing things, start following this new process, start selling this new item. And we say, as of April 1st, and we draw a line in the sand. And what tends to happen is then we tend to go, we're done, and we walk away. But up until that point, you can plan things. You kind of know what you're doing, you know where you're going, you can plan things. And so you tend to organize yourselves in a way that you can project manage it, you can report on progress, all of those sorts of things, right? Then the change happens and we're finished and we close it out. But there's all these unknowns that happen. And so after go live, you need to have a group of people that can function in a very agile format, that they're just monitoring pulses, right? They're checking in on those KPIs, and then they're responding real time as issues arise. So they may have a standing meeting where, hey, we're starting to see that this isn't working. We're starting to deal with some people who maybe are getting frustrated. This isn't turning out the way we thought it was. People are reverting back to their old ways. All of those are sort of the things that your transition management team can continue to speak into and to contribute to going forward. So you will want to think about super users or change advocates, any of those folks that really get the why and they're really bought in are great people to be on that team. And so it just helps to deal with any of those unknown variables. And so highly recommend that you consider an ongoing transition team. So that is it. That was a lot of information, a lot of content, but I will tell you that I am in organizations all the time where we see these same sorts of challenges. And if there's anything we can do to help just make change not be so hard, because there's just so much of it, right? That people are getting so tired. And we've seen people, so much turnover at organizations, which is incredibly costly. So I just want to help drive positive change. And the only way I believe that people can be persuaded to change anything is to know that they're cared for and to know that they're not being taken advantage of. And it is so easy to get caught up in tasks and deadlines and ROI. But at the end of the day, we all go to work because we want to have purpose and we want to know that what we're doing is making a difference. You are in such a unique position. You get to help people navigate change in a positive way. And I just implore you to go out into the world and create more positive change. Take care of people, take care of people, take care of people. Put a few resources here for you that you are more than welcome to access. I'm in the process of developing a change enablement platform. And so when that becomes available, if you are interested in being a beta tester, you can email us at info@plusdelta314.com. And then that 7 Layers of Change ebook that I referenced earlier in the presentation as well is available if you go to plusdelta314.com/layers ebook. If you need anyone to assist you, if you just need some coaching, if you have any questions, I am always here and I am always available. You can email info@plusdelta314.com, or here is my personal contact information, Tabitha@plusdelta314, my phone number, and our web address. So look forward to hearing from you. And until then, happy changing.